Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a couple of games to discuss. So we're going to break down Alabama's win over LSU that happened Saturday night by a score of 80-73. We'll talk about how it happened, what all we kind of learned during this game. And then we will break down Alabama's game that's going to be in Starkville on Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. We'll talk about that game, give a prediction, give a preview, talk about what Alabama's going to have to clean up post this LSU game to be successful in Starkville, and then we'll get out of here. So as I mentioned, Alabama wins the LSU game by a score of 80-73, and I guess I'll start up top with the biggest story. And the biggest story of this game wasn't the win. The biggest story coming out of this game actually was that Mark Sears, the potential All-American, goes for 0 points and does not play at all in the second half. There have been a lot of questions surrounding the second half and why he did not play in the second half. Nate Oates made the comment that we played the guys who we thought gave us the best potential to win, and kind of did not address Mark Sears specifically, knowing that that's what the question was about. To me, and this is purely my assumption based on body language and what I could tell, it felt like there was probably some type of argument, I don't know exactly what you want to call it, that happened in the locker room at halftime. And coming out of the half, potentially Mark didn't like the criticism he was given. And there was a little bit of sulking and things like that where, Mark had a towel over his head. There's been videos floating around of him talking to Preston Murphy, almost pleading his case or complaining about certain things. There were also moments as for some of you that don't know, my seats for my season tickets are kind of catty corner behind the bench. So I, am very close to the Alabama bench. And Mark sat much further away from Oates and Pannone and such than he typically would. Usually starters, even if they're not going to be the ones going in right out of half, they sit much closer to the end that they're going to be put in from, and Mark sat much further down the bench. So I don't know what all transpired. I'm not going to sit here and try to say this is what I think transpired. But what I will say that happened during the game that me and my people I was sitting next to talked about, because it was very obvious to us, is that we were aware that Mark had 0 points, and I felt very confident that Mark was aware that Mark had 0 points, and it was upsetting him. And there were moments where it felt like Mark was going in hunting his shot. Now, granted, he only puts up in this game 5 shots, but some of the 2-point shots that were put up were just not the best shot available, right? It really felt like Mark was driving into a crowd and was trying to get a layup to go in so that he could get on the board. And, he either would miss an open opportunity for a kick out. He did have a couple assists in that first half. He had 3 assists. But it really felt like there were just moments that he was hunting his shot, much more than you typically see Mark hunting his shot. And it was something that was very obvious to me, right? And at moments, it felt like the offense just ran more smoothly when Aiden Holloway was on the floor. My gut says that was part of the conversation, and I don't know what all the specifics are. Like I said, I'm not going to guess. But if I was to, say what my thoughts are, I think that the offense was running slightly more smoothly when Aiden was in. And like I said, Nate's comments were we played the players that we thought gave us the best chance to win. And what you see come out of half is a lineup of Jaron Stevenson, Grant Nelson, Chris Youngblood, Aiden Holloway, and Mohamed Diabate, right? And I think that was just, Nate trying to send a message to multiple guys, right? Not just Mark. I think he also was sending a message to Cliff. I tweeted out during this game that at one of the timeouts, Nate was just appalled that they had 8 offensive rebounds. LSU, I talked at length about how LSU was not a great rebounding team. LSU was one of the worst defensive rebounding teams that Alabama's going to face, bottom 300 in the country. And clearly the week off has helped LSU prepare because they cleaned up their rebounding. LSU out-rebounded us in this game, largely due to the fact that they had 17 offensive rebounds. But they just were really, really good on the glass. Most of this was because Corey Chess was just an animal on the glass. He goes for 12 and 18. He had 15 rebounds at half. And like I said, at one of the timeouts in the early part of the first half, Nate, gets the paper and is like screaming at the guys. They have 8-0 boards, right? I could hear him from my seats, and I'm not close enough that I typically hear Nate. And right, so I hear what he's saying, and it was very clear that, like I said, he's trying to send a message to multiple people on the team, right? There were stretches where, an O board or something gets missed, and in Nate's opinion, either Cliff or Grant or somebody just should have had it. He immediately calls for Mo, right? He immediately calls for Mo D. Hey, we need a better rebounder in there. Like, I'm going to put you in if these guys can't rebound. And so there were a few moments that happened like this. I will say one of the only moments that I've ever seen, oddly enough, the actually very beginning of this game, LSU gets off to a pretty quick start. It was like 7-2. And Nate puts 3 guys for subs at the scorer's table. And then Chris Youngblood, who got the start in lieu of LeBaron Fallon, because LeBaron Fallon had a bit of an ankle that got turned earlier in the week in practice. So Chris gets his first start of the year. He goes off, has quite a few points. They get a couple of stops on defense, and Nate immediately pulls everybody off the bench or off the scorer's table and doesn't put him in. He ends up putting him in at the under 16. It was not something I don't know that I've ever seen before, but that Nate was kind of almost pseudo rewarding the people that were able to keep the run going. And so, like I said, he puts them back out there. There were people that played decently well in this game. Alabama definitely has a lot of things to clean up. I think part of this also should be credit to LSU. I think that LSU in this game, you could tell that they had prepared for a week and did not have a midweek game. Like I said, their rebounding was much better than you typically see from them. It felt like some of their defense was better. I will say from a defensive perspective, I think part of the thing that was a difference in this game is there was only 38 foul calls in this game. And I say only because if you watch this game, it was an incredibly physical game. LSU really felt like they were holding every screen. There was a lot of, anytime there was a cut, they were like, grabbing onto the cutter. And there was a lot of physicality at the rim because both teams were trying to score, at the rim. Alabama obviously has a lot of success with that for the majority of the season. This is one of Alabama's actually worst 2-point percentages on the season. I guess partially due to the fact that Aiden Holloway only goes 2 for 6 and LeBaron goes 1 for 5 down low. So Alabama shoots 52% from 2. And like I said, a lot of that was due to the physicality and the lack of foul calls, right? There was plenty of times in this game where under normal SEC official circumstances, you would have expected there to be another foul call. And like I said, there were 38 foul calls in this game, but I would have expected, based on the physicality of this game, for there to be, somewhere between 6 and 10 more at a minimum, just because of how physical this game really was. And like I said, the things that were and weren't called just were kind of baffling. I know Nate was losing his mind at certain moments where, just very clear, like either moving screens or this or that. And the officials kind of just kept their whistle hanging. They didn't blow the whistle a lot. And I know for a team that gets to the foul line a lot and some people that like to get to the foul line and shoot foul shots, it was just a much more physical game with much less foul calls than we typically would see in the SEC. But for some of the guys that actually did play really well, I thought that Cliff, he didn't play well in the first half. He played much better in the second half. Nate mentioned that we missed him on some lobs. And he could have had even a better offensive output that he had. He does have 8 points on 4 of 4. I do believe all of those were dunks. He goes 0 of 2 from the line, which you don't love to see. You'd like to see him at least make one. Was by far our leading offensive rebounder with 4. And that was the spot. He actually does win the hard hat because of it. Has 9 rebounds. He has 3 assists. He isn't able to get a block, but oddly enough, actually, Chris Youngblood led us in blocks with 2. I thought that Chris, in his first start, played absolutely incredibly. As far as offense at the start of this game, Chris was a huge piece of our offense. He doesn't end up shooting great from 3, only going 1 of 5, but was 4 for 5 from inside the arc, goes 2 of 2 from the line, has a couple assists, has some rebounds, has a steal, has the blocks, right? You can really tell that he's getting much more comfortable and within himself. I will say that his handles are not not ideal, so I would like to make sure that, if he's on the floor, he's out there with an Aiden, a Mark Sears, a LeBaron. He needs an extra guard with him, to be a primary ball handler, because he is just not super comfortable with the ball in his hands. He really feels more like, I saw a thing where he feels kind of like Rylan Griffin was last year. I wouldn't go quite that far. I think that Chris has better handles, and I think part of this may just be because LSU wasn't having the whistle blown quite as much. They were pretty aggressive with poke outs and such. So I do think that, under certain circumstances, I think Chris's handles will be good enough, but I don't think that he should be your primary ball handler in any lineup, really. That's just not going to be where his skill set is best. But I do think that in general, he had a pretty good game. Another guy that I thought had a great game, and he was my player to watch for this one, led us in scoring, was Aiden Holloway. Aiden has just been on an absolute tear the last couple of games. If we pull up his most recent scoring performances, he has 19 against LSU, 22 against Vanderbilt, 6 against Kentucky, 15 against A&M, 15 against Ole Miss, 15 against A&M, 13 against South Carolina, 10 against Oklahoma, 26 against South Dakota, and 13 against Kent State. So he is 8 out of the last 9 games. He has went for double figures, right? He just very clearly is getting very comfortable with the offense, getting very comfortable in what his role looks like. That's been very efficient scoring. His percentages, I'm sure, came down a little bit, but previously he was leading the SEC in field goal percentage for the entire conference. He's just been super efficient. He's been a really good scorer. The change of pace he provides from an offensive perspective, he really reminds you of like what we had out of a Javon Quinterly. And I think that is kind of obviously the role that we assumed he might play, but he really is very, very good in that sense because he does provide that really, really quick burst of speed off the bench. He provides just a change of pace on offense and an elite shooter, right? And somebody that when he's playing within himself and playing the game, how he likes to play it, he's just almost unguardable when he's making his shots. He goes 3 of 8 from 3, so an okay shooting performance, not his best, but definitely not his worst. Has a couple of steals, and that's something that I mentioned that I thought has been trending upwards, and Nate talked about it as well. Aiden's defense has gotten so much better. With steals, poke outs. We had the block last game. Just his defense has gotten much, much better than it was at the start of the season or than it was last year. And I think that's a big difference is the ability you have to play Aiden more minutes when he's able to defend like that. Because when he's not, you're wanting to put in somebody like a LeBaron Philon or Chris Youngblood just for a better defender. But when Aiden is doing that, his offense is obviously at a level that you want him in as much as possible. Another guy we can talk about is Mohamed Diabate. Was a really good game, not his best game. You could argue that one was his last one, but he did have 14 points. I thought that he played really, really well. Saying it's not his best, when you're coming off the performance you're coming off of is kind of just underselling how great his performance was last time. But he is a glue guy for this team. He is somebody that Nate calls on, like I said, anytime that we have any type of rebounding issues, we call on him. Anytime you need a lockdown defender, you have somebody starting to go off, we call on him. Mohamed Diabate is just a guy that you can switch 1 through 5, and it's just a huge importance to this team, right? He showed it again in this game. He ends up coming up with 1 steal. I know we had a couple of other poke outs that ended up just going out of bounds. He ends up not actually recording a block. I thought he got one, but again, just a guy that you absolutely love seeing the success he's having. And I know guys like Joe Corona and some others that have talked about Mo at depth really, really like what you're seeing out of Mo. I think the last thing I'll say about this game and what this shows us is in the first half, Grant Nelson and Mark Sears had combined for 2 points. And when we talk about the depth of this team, a lot of what people think you're talking about is just you have bodies. When you hear depth a lot is, you have bodies if you get into foul trouble, right? That's what a lot of teams use depth as is, if we get into foul trouble, we have some extra guys. And don't get me wrong, that is a good thing to have. But when Nate Oates has his depth, what it really means is, A, you have other guys that can score the basketball. B, it has other guys where if somebody's not having their best defensive game or best offensive game, you can just swap somebody out. And C, you're able to actually hold guys accountable, right? And when I think is happening and the last thing I'll say about the Mark Sears front is I think Nate is holding Mark accountable because he has a point guard in Aiden and, even LeBaron to a lesser extent, but he has a backup point guard that is fully serviceable, right? In years past, when you had a Jaden Shackelford or when you had a Javon Quinterly, there were moments where those guys were not playing great defense, but the teams that they were on were not good enough that you were going to lose such a bit of offense when you took them out. It was a major issue. But you saw, when you put Aiden in place of Mark, it didn't really cause as much of a drop-off from an offense to defense perspective. And I think that's the big difference in this, right? So it is something where I do think Nate's able to hold people a little bit more accountable than he has been able to in years past. You saw that with Mohamed Diabate, taking over for a Cliff or for a Grant. Lesser extent, Jaren didn't have his best offensive game, but he did have, 3 steals. He had a couple of assists. He hit a 3. Jaren is still just been playing really good defense for the most part. And I think that, being able to use guys like an Aiden Holloway, like a Mohamed Diabate, Chris Youngblood obviously started in this game, but Chris has also been able to use like this to hold guys accountable that are starting or they're playing major minutes because you have guys that are just as good on the bench. I think that's the thing that's the benefit of this team and is so helpful. Aiden Sherrill, I think, would be playing more minutes if he could just stop from fouling. I know he plays 4 minutes in this game, gets 2 fouls, and Nate doesn't really go to him in the second half. He got both those fouls in the first half. I know one of the fouls was Nate was immediately screaming at him, "Hey, you got to put your hands up." And he just has to learn how to defend in the post without getting the foul calls. It's something that I'm sure a lot of people, especially bigs, struggle with moving from high school and AAU to college. But that's something that I expect to be cleaned up. But, he's somebody that I do expect to get some more playing time, but, he just has to stop fouling. We saw that last year with Muhammad Wagi. He got played a lot more just because we had to, but due to the fact that you can play a small ball 5 with Muhammad D, or you've got Cliff and Grant, some other guys that can play the 5, you just don't have to have Aiden play the 5. And so I think that's part of the reason why the minutes are down, especially while the fouls are up currently. So that's what I have to say about this game. Like I said, a few different comments. I do would like to hear what other people's thoughts are as it relates to either Mark Sears, what the team has done, positively or negatively. I think in this game, the first half was kind of just a disaster from a defensive standpoint. And that's a lot of the reason why some of the changes were made that were made. A lot of the disaster also was on the rebounding side, which is why I think you saw Mohamed Diabate in the game a lot more. But credit to LSU. I do think a lot of this was because LSU had a week to prepare. I do think that LSU cleaned up a lot of things that we had potentially seen on the tape or in the stats that maybe were weaknesses. And because LSU had that week to prepare, I think they were much better. And so credit to them, right? It's a well-coached team, a pretty good team, and they were able to give us really all that we wanted to handle. Alabama was up 13 near the end of this game, and LSU cuts it to 6 or 7. We end up winning by 7. And again, credit to LSU. I think their week to prepare really got them ready for this game. I think that it really showed, and I think this team is going to win some more games in conference. I don't think that they're going to obviously be near the top of the conference with the 6 losses, but I do think that they're going to win more games than people are going to give them credit for, and credit to them for that. So we're going to move over to the Mississippi State game, and then we'll get out of here. So Alabama goes this Wednesday to Starkville, to the Hump, a place that we have had some success here recently, but a place that will be very, very tough to play. Mississippi State has done a really good job from a home court advantage standpoint. They did drop the Kentucky game at home, but was able to knock off Ole Miss at home the next weekend. So they also beat South Carolina at home. Were able to beat Pitt at home earlier this year, and in general just have had some pretty good games. I think that Mississippi State is a team that Alabama matches up well against if we shoot well, but is a team that definitely can expose you if Alabama does not play their game, right? Mississippi State is known as a very good defensive team. Funny enough, actually this season they're a slightly better offense than they are defense, but their defense is still what they're kind of known for. And their defense is what they're known for because they have a couple of guys that are just absolute dogs, right? You have a guy like Cam Matthews, and he is probably the guy which you're most concerned about potentially taking over a game. He's 8th in the country in steals, just a super physical guy, really good at rebounding, and is somebody that you're going to be trying to figure out what's the best way to attack him. The potential foul trouble he's in or not in is something that you're going to want to watch. He is somebody that at times will get into a little bit of foul trouble just because of how aggressive he is from a defensive standpoint. And it is something that you just kind of have to watch when you're playing Mississippi State. Another guy that you really have to make sure doesn't beat you is a guy like Josh Hubbard. Last season, he was a freshman, so this season, Josh Hubbard is somebody that's got some extra experience under his belt, is a guy that can hit a lot of threes, is a guy that's a really good offensive option. So he is another guy that obviously you're going to want to see really good defense, stay in front of, come out a little further just because he is going to test your range from a three-point perspective. So they do have a couple of guys, and there are more, right? But a couple of guys that are just really good at doing stuff. And the thing with Josh Hubbard is he's actually – seeing this here, he's actually 39th in the country in turnover rate, right? So he does, from a point guard perspective, he just does a really good job of not turning over the ball. Mississippi State is not an elite three-point shooting team outside of Josh Hubbard, right? Hubbard is by far their best three-point shooter. They do have Riley Kugel and Claudell Harris, so they have a few more three-point shooters than they have had in years past. But Hubbard is one of their better three-point shooters of the group. It looks like Harris actually is around 35% as well as Kugel. So all three guys kind of sitting around 35% as kind of their best shooters. But in general, just all of these guys have done a pretty good job of turning Mississippi State into a better offense this season than they were last. I'm not expecting them to be a team that's just going to put up an absolute ton of threes. Will they put up more than Mississippi State has in years past? I think so, especially with Kugel and such. I think that they're going to put up some more threes. The stats kind of bear that out a little bit. That Mississippi State is much more of a little bit more of an offensive team this season than they have been in years past. But do not be mistaken that this is a very physical Chris Jans is a very physical coach. Is a coach that likes to coach defense, likes to have a physical defense. The rebounds are going to be fought, hard for, right? This is not going to be an easy game. Mississippi State has only dropped 4 games this season. Those were to Butler, Kentucky, Auburn, and Tennessee, right? Butler being the worst loss of those back around Thanksgiving, right? They have lost 3 games in conference, but again, none of those really bad losses. Kentucky is technically their worst loss, and that's still a completely fine loss. But obviously, when you lose a game at home in conference, it is not a good thing, right? It's what we talked about with the Alabama-Ole Miss game. When Alabama drops a game to Ole Miss at home or drops any game at home, that puts a mark on your resume because the conference is just incredibly tough this season, and you have to defend your home court, right? So when you're looking at Mississippi State, I think the things that Alabama has to do is Alabama has to clean up some of the how they handle the physicality, right? I don't think in this LSU game, the most recent game, I think because of the lack of foul calls that got in Alabama's head, and Alabama did not handle the physicality very well. This is something that you are going to see against Mississippi State. You're going to see it against Auburn. You're going to see it against Tennessee, right? These are some games that are teams that are similar to A&M in a sense that they're just going to try to beat you up. And when those games get like that, Alabama has to know how to be able to handle themselves. It's part of the reason why you played Memphis in your preseason. It's the reason, obviously, you get to play a team like Houston, you get to play a team like Texas A&M earlier in the season. Right, you play all these teams with this physicality because you know that you're going to face it in the SEC, right? Mississippi State is one of those, right? You're also going into a hostile place to play. So I expect there will be Alabama fans in attendance due to the fact that it's, an hour and a half drive from Tuscaloosa, but this will be obviously majority Mississippi State fans. This will be a very good home crowd. With it being an 8 o'clock game, that's going to give time for people to get off of work and actually get to this game. So I do expect that this is going to be a pretty good home crowd. Also, with Alabama coming in and being a top team, this is, just has the makings of a really, really good home environment. I do think that Alabama is going to have a chance to be successful. It looks like if you're looking at just kind of the big KenPom numbers as where is Mississippi State not super great. They don't do a great job defending the 3-point line, actually. And they actually do give up quite a lot of threes and more assists than you would expect out of a good defensive team. So this is a situation where if Alabama is able to get into their offensive game, I think that Alabama potentially can get some extra threes off, get some assists, with maybe some just the way Mississippi State is trying to get us out of our game from a defensive perspective. However, some places that Mississippi State is really good, that they're top 30 in the country in offensive rebounding. So Alabama will have to rebound better in this game than they did against LSU, right? For whatever reason, I think Alabama has done better at this on the road and against better teams than they have against worse teams. For whatever reason, you see a team like LSU, and because of the 5 losses, I think that it subconsciously gets into the guys' heads, and they just did not play as well against an LSU as you potentially saw, rebounding against an A&M, right? A&M's number 1 in the country at offensive rebounding, but Alabama out-rebounded them. Versus LSU, we talked about how they're not a great rebounding team. Alabama gets out-rebounded, right? So it's really just a mental thing. You hope that you don't see that, especially this deep into the season with a lot of seniors on the team and a super experienced team. But unfortunately, it is something that Alabama is still going through, and it's something that you're definitely going to want to keep an eye on because rebounding this game, especially in a home environment for Mississippi State, is something that obviously the offensive rebounds keep the crowd in the game. Mississippi State does a really good job of is stealing the basketball. Mississippi State is 12th in the country at creating steals. So similar to when we talked about the Vanderbilt team and the Ole Miss team about being able to create steals, especially if you're lazy with passes and telegraphing your passes. They're going to jump in your passing lanes. They're going to create steals. They're going to be on ball pressure. You're going to, that Cam Matthews that we talked about earlier. He's a big part of what they like to do on defense, and he is a huge piece of what they do as a team. They will steal the basketball if you're not going up physical, if you're not, making the right read, if you're not quick with your decisions, right? Because just because you make the right decision, if you wait too long to make that decision and Mississippi State knows where you're going with the ball, they have a chance to break on the ball, right? So all these things are things that Alabama is going to have to take into consideration for this game. These are things that I think Alabama needs to clean up because we have seen some games this season that Alabama's been pretty good at it, right? The Vanderbilt game, Alabama did a pretty good job not turning over the basketball. Obviously, the defense in the second half was lackluster. So, personally, I was hoping that I would see, Alabama kind of put together a full game, keep the offense from the Vanderbilt game and put together some more of the defense for this LSU game. However, LSU's week to prepare really got them ready for the game in a way that I don't think that the team was fully ready for. Nate sounded like he had mentioned it to the team, but maybe they just didn't fully grasp what that meant. But Mississippi State is a team that will be prepared for this game, right? They are going to try, to make a push to be near the top of the conference. They have to defend their home court, just like I talked about Alabama defending their home court, right? So this will be a team that will be ready to play. This will be a team that is going to be trying to do everything in their power to win this game. I think that Alabama has a good chance of winning if they will take to the coaching, right? I think that Alabama is the better team. I think that Alabama matches up actually fairly well with Mississippi State because of your guys like a Muhammad Diabate. We will see if Darian Reed plays in this game. I'm actually just going to say we will see because supposedly he was tested and could have potentially gone in the LSU game, was tested and was, hey, we're not going to play him. Maybe he will play in the Mississippi State game. As for now, he's been questionable for the last few games and then gets ruled out just before the game. So if we have him, obviously that's an additional body. And I think from a physicality standpoint, it would be good to have him. He also gives you a wing defender and a wing guy that could potentially match up with like a Cam Matthews or a RJ Melendez, even a Caldell Harris, right? Mississippi State has some of these guys in that 6'4", 6'7" range that a guy like Darian Reed or a guy like Muhammad Diabate is a really good defensive option against because some of these guys can get heated up and going from an offensive end. So I would love to have Darian, but we will see if he ends up playing this game. I have no idea, as y'all can clearly tell, but we will see what ends up happening. I do think that Alabama actually wins this game. For whatever reason, I think Nate Oates has matched up really, really well with Chris Jans in the past. I know last season Alabama actually wins both. The home game Alabama wins by 8. The game in the game in Starkville Alabama wins by 8. The game in Coleman Alabama wins by 22. And then the season before, Chris Jans' first season, Alabama wins the game in Starkville by 11 and the game in Coleman by 3. So this is a situation where Alabama has been very successful in years past against Chris Jans, whether it been home or away. So I think that Nate Oates, A, knows what Chris Jans is going to try to do, and B, knows what his team is capable of. Also, for whatever reason, Alabama has just done a better job playing on the road than they have at home. I don't know why that reasoning is, but it really feels like Alabama is a little bit more fired up when they go on the road. Like the start to the game against A&M, the start to the game against Kentucky, both felt like better starts than even, honestly, the Vanderbilt game last game, right? Alabama ends up winning and going up big, but Alabama did not start that game super well. Alabama does not start this LSU game super well. However, on the road, we started much better, right? So I think there's something about this team and trying to go into a hostile environment, knowing the crowd's against you and just playing against that I think the team does really well for. And I do think that for whatever reason, I think that Alabama is going to find what it takes to win this game. So I am going to predict Alabama wins this game. I do think it's going to be a close game, though. I think that the defense and the physicality and the rebounding and such that Mississippi State brings to the table, and how Chris Jans is a coach. I just talked about all those games. The only one that was a pseudo blowout was the home game 2 years ago. Was the home game last year for Alabama. All other games were decided by 10, 11 points at the most. I think this is somewhere in the 6 to 8 point game range. So I'm going to say that this game is Alabama 84, Mississippi State 76. I do think that Alabama is going to find just enough to do what it takes to win this game. I think that Mississippi State is a good defensive team and just a good team overall. So I do think that this is a game that if the guys are not ready, right? If there's some level of just not prepared, Mississippi State will win this game. Bar none, no questions asked. But if Alabama is prepared, as they have been on the road this season, then I think that Alabama will win this game and will find a way to get out of Starkville with the win. So as I said, I'm going to go 84-76, and I will catch you guys in the next episode. I really appreciate all the support on all these episodes. They will continue to come out on Sundays and then on potentially, either Wednesday or Thursday, depending upon when our basketball game is. I'll try to record this next episode this week as early as possible so that y'all can watch it. It may come out on Friday, probably will record on Thursday so that it will come out on Friday so that y'all can listen as a preview for the Georgia game. But these episodes will continue to come out as quickly as I can get them out. Want to make sure I have all the information at my disposal when I record them. But I really do appreciate all the support on these episodes. Follow along on the YouTube or on Twitter if you are interested. I do appreciate the support, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.